All right, deep divers, buckle up. Today we're diving headfirst into a geopolitical pressure cooker, the South China Sea.
That's right. You wanted the lowdown on this globally important stretch of water, and we've been combing through the research to bring you the why and the what.
We're starting with some excerpts from, you guessed it, Wikipedia.
Don't roll your eyes just yet.
I know, but think of it like that friend who always has the basic rundown right.
Exactly. A solid launch pad for a deeper dive.
So picture this. You're looking at a satellite image of Southeast Asia. Nestled between China, the Philippines, Vietnam, there it is, the South China Sea. Massive, right?
Absolutely. We're talking 3.5 million square kilometers. To put that in perspective, it's bigger than the Mediterranean.
Wow. And it's way more than just a dot on the map, isn't it? It's like a maritime highway, essential for global trade.
Right. A staggering $3.4 trillion worth of goods moved through those shipping lanes just back in 2016.
3.4 trillion with a T. I mean, help me wrap my head around that. What does that even look like in the real world?
Well, think about it. Any hiccup in that flow, any disruption, it sends ripples throughout the entire global economy. Prices of everything from the stuff we buy every day to the materials used to make it, it all gets impacted. Your phone, clothes, even the food on your plate. Chances are they've been influenced by the South China Sea.
So this is way bigger than just some countries squabbling over territory.
Exactly. And it gets even more complicated when you factor in what lies beneath the surface.
You mean besides sharks and shipwrecks?
Haha, well, those too. But I'm talking about the motherlode oil and natural gas. We're talking vast reserves, the kind that gets every nation in the region vying for a piece of the pie.
And don't forget fishing. It's a vital source of food and income for so many people.
Absolutely. You're right. It's a critical part of the equation. All these factors combined create a recipe for, well, let's just say things can get a little tense.
No kidding. Especially with so many countries claiming a piece of the South China Sea.
You're looking at China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, Brunei.
Wow, that's a lot of players. I'm guessing history has something to do with these overlapping claims.
It's at the heart of it. Take China, for instance. Their claims, often shown on those 9-dash line maps, which, by the way, are super controversial, are rooted in their history of maritime power. Centuries of it, they'd argue.
But they aren't the only ones with a story to tell.
Exactly. Each nation in the region has its own historical narrative, its own evidence to back up its claim to the South China Sea. It's this tangle of history that fuels the ongoing disputes.
Speaking of history, even calling it the South China Sea feels like it comes with its own baggage, right?
You hit the nail on the head. That name itself is a bit of a relic, reflecting centuries of shifting power dynamics. It started appearing on maps back in the 16th century, thanks to European cartographers, especially the Portuguese. They saw it as their sea lane to China, their gateway to trade.
So it's kind of a Eurocentric label slapped onto a region with its own rich maritime history and identity.
Precisely. Long before European influence, the sea was known by various local names, like the Champa Sea or Sea of Cham, referencing a powerful maritime kingdom that once thrived in what we now call central Vietnam.
It's amazing how a name can be like a time capsule, you know. But I'm curious, what's going on beneath the surface of the South China Sea? What makes it so unique geographically?
Well, under those bustling shipping routes and contested waters, there's this whole other story going on, a geological one. Millions of years ago, forget the South China Sea as we know it, picture a huge continental shelf, basically underwater Southeast Asia.
So all that water, all that sea, it wasn't always there. How did it become, well, this?
Imagine the ice ages, right. Sea level was way lower. Back then, you could have walked from mainland Asia to places like Borneo.
Wow, seriously.
But then, around 45 million years ago, things got moving, literally. The Earth's tectonic plates, those big chunks of crust, they started pulling apart, creating the South China Sea basin.
It's mind-blowing thinking about those timescales. Forces that can reshape continents.
Right. The planet's always changing, even if we don't see it happening. And that's what gave the South China Sea its unique underwater landscape. Deep basins, submerged plateaus, and of course all those islands, reefs, and shoals.
Speaking of which, some of those features are kind of infamous, aren't they? Dangerous ground. That doesn't sound like a place I'd want to go snorkeling.
You and me both. It's called that for a reason. Submerged reefs, shoals, banks. It's a navigational nightmare. Throughout history, countless ships have met their end in the dangerous ground.
So it's not just politics making the South China Sea a potential powder keg. The geography itself adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Exactly. You've got inherently tricky navigation, limited visibility, and then throw in a history of maritime disputes. It's a recipe for misunderstandings and accidents. Even something small could blow up in that environment.
It's a pretty vivid picture you're painting, shaped by history, by geology, and, yeah, by conflict, too.
Yeah, and not just ancient history either. The 20th century saw its share of clashes.
Right, like that face-off over the Paracel Islands in '74, China and South Vietnam.
Exactly. And then the Spratly Islands clash in '88, again with China and Vietnam. These weren't isolated incidents. They highlight how volatile the region can be.
And that volatility hasn't gone away, has it? I mean, that incident in 2014 really grabbed the world's attention. China, Vietnam, and an oil rig.
Ah, yes, the standoff near the Paracel Islands.
Yeah.
China moved that oil rig into waters claimed by Vietnam and, well, let's just say things escalated quickly.
Yeah.
You had ships playing chicken, ramming, even water cannons.
Sounds intense.
It was a wake-up call, really. Showed just how intertwined economic interests and resource competition are with all the geopolitical maneuvering.
Makes you wonder if it's just a matter of time before something like that happens again. But it can't be all conflict all the time, right? Surely there are attempts at cooperation in the South China Sea, too.
You're right, it's not all doom and gloom. There are bright spots, like the Gulf of Thailand, where countries have found ways to share resources.
Oh, yeah. What's happening there?
Think Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, they all border the Gulf. And they've set up these joint development authorities to manage oil and gas exploration, even revenue sharing. It shows that cooperation is possible, even when disputes are simmering in the background.
Okay, that is a glimmer of hope. It's good to be reminded that diplomacy can work. But then there's, well, the elephant in the room. Or should I say the warship in the sea. How does the United States factor into all of this?
Ah, yes, the U.S. It's interesting because they don't actually claim any territory in the South China Sea,
Right.
but they're heavily invested in making sure everyone can sail freely through the region. They're all about maintaining the existing international order.
Which puts them at odds with China.
Right. You could say that. The U.S. Navy regularly sails its warships near those Chinese-held islands. It's their way of saying, hey, we don't recognize China's attempts to control these waters, which we believe are international.
And those maneuvers, I imagine, those don't go over well in Beijing.
Not really. China sees it as a provocation, a challenge to their sovereignty. So those operations, they often lead to some fiery rhetoric and a definite rise in tension. It's a delicate balancing act, to say the least.
It really highlights just how high the stakes are. But beyond military displays, wasn't there a legal challenge to China's claims a while back?
That's right. In 2016, the Philippines, after years of Chinese pressure, decided to take their case to court. Literally. They filed a case with the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, challenging those expansive claims based on the 9-line.
So they took it from the high seas to the courtroom. Gutsy move.
And the ruling, which came down in July 2016, well, it sent shockwaves. The court basically sided with the Philippines, saying that a lot of China's claims, especially those based on that 9-line, held no water under international law.
Wow, a legal smackdown. That's huge. How did China react to that?
Pretty much as you'd expect. They rejected the ruling completely, called it null and void, said the court had no authority, and just kept on asserting their claims as if nothing had happened.
So much for the power of international law, huh?
It shows its limitations, that's for sure, especially when you're dealing with a powerful country determined to go its own way. Enforcing those rulings, it often comes down to diplomacy, pressure from the international community, or the threat of economic or political consequences.
Well, as we resurface from our deep dive into the South China Sea, one thing's clear. We've been navigating some seriously murky waters. We've got history, geography, resources, competing national interests. It's a lot.
It is. And the stakes. Sky high. Any misstep, any miscalculation could have global consequences. It's a stark reminder that understanding what's at play in the South China Sea, the nuances, the history, it's crucial if we want any hope of finding peaceful and lasting solutions.
Couldn't agree more. It's a region that needs our attention, not just because of the geopolitics, but because of the very real impact it has on people's lives, millions of them, in the region and beyond. So, to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey to the South China Sea. We hope you've surfaced with a deeper understanding of this critically important waterway and all the challenges and maybe even a few glimmers of hope it holds. Until next time, keep exploring, deep divers.